Hello and welcome to another episode of the Phillip Wylie Show. I'm very excited to have my friend John Woodling joining today. John is a member of our DFW cybersecurity community, and a member of my DEFCON group in Denton, Texas, and uh, always running into John at conferences and stuff. And so finally got around to inviting John to be on the podcast. So welcome to the show, John.
Hey, thanks, Phil. Yeah, happy to be here. Been listening to the show for a while, and I'm glad to finally be on.
It's good to have you on because, we have a lot of people listening that are just trying to break in, or someone or the people that are just new to the industry. So people like yourself to like to share and mentor and help others, or you usually have some really good advice for folks. So it's great to have you on.
Yeah. No, I mean, I've been in the industry for a little while. I mean, 7 years is a while, but so, I mean, it's changed even since I've started. But um, I think there's still a lot of things that individuals like myself can still hopefully share. But I also don't want to act like I know how it is today. But, I try to do my best to help everybody out.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting, this industry we're in, because it's when people say sometimes that cybersecurity is not entry level. I mean, it's not really an easy field to get into. You can get into it with work and stuff, but it's almost, I guess, kind of different than just trying to go into like IT or something, because you have people coming into security that are coming over from IT or some other technical area moving into cybersecurity.
Yeah, and then also like the breadth of what cybersecurity is has changed, especially in the last like 15 years, even in the last 7 years since I've joined in. So, there's a lot of different facets now, such as GRCs taking a bigger role than probably what it used to be, and it's being lumped in with cybersecurity. So you have individuals that are getting in that way. You have individuals who are doing the social engineering side, which doesn't really deal much with the traditional cybersecurity paradigm of basically hacking into things and red teaming. And so you have individuals who worked at bars for 10 years, or they were hairdressers, who know how to talk to people, and they can get people to tell them things that otherwise they wouldn't. And then you have your traditional route, and then um, and then you have your kind of like help desk to blue teamer kind of route that someone like Swift on security has gone through. And then you have other individuals who were programmers that are now, breaking applications. It's very, very broad. And I think that there's a lot of room for a lot of different individuals.
Yeah, and it's really interesting because that's one of the nice things about the show is people listen, and just a lot of cases it's not always advice, but it's hearing the backgrounds of people, because I think it's one of the comparisons I like to make is almost like sports. You see some type of event like a 1 mile run or something, the times in that stays the same for a long time, but you ever noticed how when someone breaks that record, then a lot of people start breaking the record. It's not that people weren't capable, but they just didn't realize they were. And that encouragement seems to help people. And so that's one of the great things about the stories that my guests share on this podcast.
Yeah, yeah. I think definitely having representation does matter, and someone that you can connect with, right? So being able to, maybe that individual reminds you of someone that they look like you in some facet, they have a similar background to you, or maybe you can connect personally with their story, and it gives you that small bump to say, you know what, I had thought about this, and I didn't really think that maybe I could do it, but there's other individuals that are there, and I can't measure myself against them, but if they can do it, why can't I do it? Right. And so I think absolutely 100% making sure that we are, are helping those individuals, see that those people exist. The people like you, or the people that have similar backgrounds to you or whatnot. Yeah. They've come in, they've made it. And I mean, you see that across, all sorts of industries and other places as well, to show, hey, like, I mean, think of like, Barbie dolls, right? So now you have Barbie dolls that are all sorts of different types of individuals, different backgrounds, um, ones that are differently abled, wheelchairs, whatnot. And it allows those people to say, hey, like, this is something that I can connect with. So,
And kind of one of the things too, for people listening that are wanting to get into this, it may seem overwhelming and impossible, but a lot of the people you see out there, we felt the same way when we were trying to get in. It was
Yeah.
impossible. Could we ever do this? And once you're finally there, it's like, wow, okay, that wasn't too bad.
Yeah, and my other favorite part about it is when you're coming in, you're like, man, these people are so smart. Then you finally get in here, you're like, nobody knows anything. Oh, Jesus. Nobody knows anything. Like, I thought you all knew everything. I thought once I'd get to this point, I would know something, and I find out that I knew less than when I started. So yeah, it's definitely interesting, but um, the ability to be endlessly curious about things, to really dig into things, and I mean, I don't know if I'd call it passion, but certain traits definitely lend itself to helping you get there quicker. But that's not even it's not strictly for cybersecurity. Like it's like how you are as a person in some capacity as well. And that's not to say that you have to be that way to get in, but it does help sometimes when you can zero in on something and it's 10 p.m. and then you look up and then it's 3 a.m. and you're on some weird YouTube video or Wikipedia article about some weird BGP glitch or something that happened. And I think it was like, was it Kazakhstan at some point poisoned it and all the traffic on the internet was going through it, and you're sitting there learning about networking and like, oh wow, okay, like I need to go to bed because I got to be at work in 3 hours. Um, but yeah, it's interesting to say the least, and it never gets boring.
So speaking of stories and stuff, why don't you share your origin story, kind of how you got started?
Ooh, okay. So I feel like mine is kind of sort of run of the mill, but it's not. So when I was growing up, I was very fortunate. So my father was actually a computer engineer, and so this was back in the day. So I'm close to 40, and this was back in the mid and early 90s. So my first computer was actually a 386, which was subsequently replaced by 486DX2 that had a math coprocessor on it, which was a big deal. And so I was exposed to this pretty early on. I tried to learn basic. To be honest with you, I've never been great at programming. I've picked it up. I picked up scripting and other things, but um, a lot of what I did early on was really playing with computers on a home network, because at that time Macs were big in schools and Windows PCs weren't, because Apple used to give massive education discounts. So I'd play on the Macs at work, but then I'd come home and I'd have like a Windows 3.1 PC that I'd be messing with, and messing with DOS, playing Commander Keen and all that stuff. I kind of got into trouble a couple of times because uh, my dad didn't realize that I knew how to surf the network, and so I started going through all his file shares. I started asking him about things, and then he had to start locking things down. So then I started figuring out how to get around things, how to unplug cables and move cables around to figure all that out. And that's kind of where all that started from learning about security and other things. And I was a kid in school. We'd figured out how to get around the controls to change the backgrounds. And then in college, really dating myself, Napster was popular. So we would figure out how to get around all the network security controls to try to share all the files, watch all the videos, play all the games. And then I kind of fell out of it. So originally I wanted to be an artist. So I started out trying to move into being a comic book artist. That didn't work out. And then eventually I fell back into the field of computers and worked through a couple of help desk jobs until I ended up where I am now, which is a Senior Information Security Analyst. A lot of that was self-taught, but I cannot understate that I did not do any of this alone. All of this was individuals that helped me along the way, people that help provide either education or training, or help me get to network into jobs, right? And so, like, community has been a really big thing for me from when I started out until now. So, back in the day, I would hang out in ICQ and IRC channels. Eventually it turned to like Xfire, because really I did a lot of gaming when I was doing art instead of a lot of computer training, or because I got a degree in finance thinking I was going to go into banking, when in actuality I wanted to be an artist, but then it turns out I just like computers more. So that's kind of how I ended up where I am now. But that infinite curiosity and being able to think in different ways, I think has served me in a lot of different ways that has helped me bring something to the table that other individuals on my team that may not. If you ever get a chance to talk to some of my bosses, they'll be like, I don't know how this guy's brain works, but it goes a million miles an hour, and like, it's not always great content, but it's definitely good content. So, but yeah, that's it, and that's kind of how I came up. A lot of home labbing, a lot of playing with stuff, breaking stuff, really trying to understand how to um, how to join these different communities so that I could learn more. Um, it didn't matter if it was one of my passions is coffee. So like, I'm on the coffee subreddit. Or when I was studying for my CSSP, I was on this Discord called Certification Station that's still around, that everybody was just trying to help each other like learn. Um, and that kind of thing like really has made a difference even in my current field as well. It's allowed me to grow as an individual. So, but yeah, I mean, that's pretty much it. And I probably rambled on way more than I should have.
No,
So,
that's fine. It's kind of cool when you're talking about some of the self study stuff. Is one of the things that's really been great about like IT and cybersecurity. The fact that some of the stuff you can go learn on your own, play around at home, and not have to go somewhere and get a 4-year degree or get a ton of certs to be able to do that. You can kind of
yeah.
learn it on your own, and a lot of good resources.
Yeah. I mean, that's how I basically, most of my jobs were based on my ability to present my curiosity in a way where I could show what I had learned. And that allowed me, even though I didn't have a degree, I would go, okay, I'm going to go get this CompTIA cert. This is like, I think 2012. Um, that allowed me to at least get through the HR piece of it so that I could show them with, if I had a reference, because I think most of these jobs, let's be honest, I got a reference in because they never would have looked at me otherwise, to show them what I had done and what I do in my spare time and these other things. And um, I feel very fortunate because of the people that I knew. Some of them were like, "Hey, I have this old computer," and I'm like, "Great. Are you getting rid of it?" "Yeah, I just bought a new gaming rig. I don't need this old one." "Cool. Like, do you want like $100 for it?" "Yeah, sure. That go be my domain controller." And I would go, back in the day, pirate Windows 2003, which I probably shouldn't admit to, but it was the only way that I could get a DC up and running so that I could learn about Active Directory and these other things. Back in those days, they didn't exactly have free downloads like they do now, where you can go get, oh, it's 90 days with 3 rearms. Okay, like that's almost a year's worth of labbing that you can do with those free things. Or um, I remember having to buy Red Hat on CD to kind of like learn a little bit about Linux or Ubuntu back before the internet had speeds that you could download all those images on. Otherwise, you'd be sitting there for 3 days on a BitTorrent and then it'd drop and you'd cry because you're like, okay, let's start all over again. But yeah, I mean, I think it's more accessible today, which I think is fantastic. I think that in some capacity it is, right? So like, I don't want to speak for everywhere in the world because um, and I've read these things in certain countries, right? Like everything's metered, so it's not as cost effective for them to sit there and download things and run things off the cloud, and it's much harder for them. But it feels like within the United States and some of these other countries where you have access to high speed internet that's not metered and not as expensive electronics, you can do that. You don't have to be of a certain economic class to get a hold of that. And I think that's really powerful. And I think that I know it's changed lives because I've met people who have definitely come from situations where they did not have much and they were able to turn all of their knowledge into a job where it was like night and day for them.
Yeah, that's one of the things I've really loved about bug bounties, because I used to be a bug crowd ambassador, and just seeing a lot of people in bug bounties in some of these other countries that don't have the opportunities and jobs. You can do bug bounty around the globe, and you see some of these people that have been successful at it, that they've bought homes for their families, been able to
Yeah.
buy cars, been able to buy, MacBook Pros to be able to do their work on. Otherwise, they wouldn't have had the opportunities. And it's good that they have that, because one of the things I think that's kind of helped reduce too is you look at some of the possibility of cyber crimes. And sometimes
Hmm.
people are forced into situations that there's nothing else they can really do. That's kind of the only option they have. You live somewhere where, you don't know if your family's going to eat or you're going to eat, and you're going to do things because we all, I think most people, I mean, I think would do, if desperate times come, call for desperate measures. And
Hmm.
I think a lot of cases when these people have the opportunity, they could do bug bounty, make the money legally. I think a lot of people would rather do it that way. And it's helped a lot of people. So it's pretty interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely, I can't speak to that situation because I personally haven't been in there, but when you're, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? So if your base needs are not being met, you're going to do things that you probably wouldn't normally do if those needs were being met. And so, I mean, I would hope that those individuals would potentially turn away from that. But I mean, and definitely things like bug bounties. I think also there's a lot of companies that have started moving into these other countries because the talent exists there. Now, I am not going to say it is altruistic because they tend to not pay as well.
Yes.
It's not like they're going to pay San Francisco money for someone that is living in Nigeria or in the Philippines or somewhere else. But in some capacity, it does bring that capability and that income to those individuals for whatever reason it is. And so, yeah, I do agree with you that definitely the internet, it feels like, has provided a lot of accessibility to different resources and jobs that we wouldn't have had 40 years ago. Um, I mean, I remember the whole offshoring thing in the early 2000s, which is actually the reason I wasn't going to go into computers at the time, because I was looking at a computer science degree and people were like, look, they're offshoring, the jobs are not coming back. Completely wrong.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, that wouldn't have been able to, that they wouldn't have been able to do that if the internet hadn't been what it had been.
Mm-hmm.
And like, you're starting to kind of see that again because you and I have both been around long enough to know that there's an ebb and flow to these things. Things go in, they go out. And so we're kind of in that right now because you're seeing these companies such as Google that are moving things to different continents out of the United States. And I hope that doesn't scare people from trying to get into this because there's a very large need for IT and security professionals as a whole.
And for those listening that live in the U.S., there's some jobs or some companies that can't do business in other countries. So some of those they have to be in the U.S. So it doesn't mean everything is going that way. And then
Yeah.
especially when you and not another reason for folks not to get alarmed either is look at the big push to go back into offices. So if you're got a push to
Hmm.
go back to office and everyone is in remote in another country, so you're not going to have to really. I don't think you have to worry so much about it because it kind of. But yeah.
Yeah, RTO kind of, in my personal opinion, it solves some issues, but I think it creates others. So while I do enjoy an in-person get together in some capacities, I've had this discussion with my management as well, which is sometimes if you're in a very competitive market, and I work for a nonprofit, so we don't pay as well as some of these other companies may. Sometimes it's hard for us to find that talent. And because they have been forcing this return to office, sometimes they can't always find the level of talent that they need when that individual may live in Oklahoma, Louisiana, or whatever, wherever our offices are not. And so, but I think at the same time, like, these groups that are able to utilize that and pick the best of the best, they don't want everyone to be the same, right? So like, they want individuals who come from different varying backgrounds, and you can call it whatever you want to call it, but you don't want everyone that has groupthink on your team, because otherwise you're never going to go outside your comfort zone and your box. So I mean, I think it's good and bad, right? So like, picking individuals from other countries with varying backgrounds, I think, does have some benefit. Where I also think that the return to office piece does as well. So, um, but yeah, I mean, that's just, now I'm going to rant on it. But it's like, you have your office right there. You got your own fridge and everything in the background. So,
So based on your experience and what you went through to get to where you're at, if you had it to do all over again, what would you do different?
So it depends. If you're talking about 10 years ago, then I would say that um, I think I would try to do more of a, like, if it was back to like my college days, I would say that I would probably either go more in on the networking side and try to get a job at like a data center, because a lot of individuals who made it into security made it through network security at the time. And I've done my CCNA. I understand networking. I love it. I think it's one of the core bases that you really need if you want to do anything in IT, because you have to understand how computers talk to each other. That's an opinion. Um, but I feel like the vast majority of jobs, you highly benefit from that. The other thing I would do is, if I could do it, I would probably have done a computer science degree back then, because that's the other way that you could get jobs at Google or whatever at the time, was they wanted people with comp sci degrees. If it was today, today's a little bit different. So I feel like there's been a transition inside our field, and we've moved away from the positions as more of white collar traditional college jobs, almost to more of a trade profession. So I feel like you highly benefit from getting in and getting experience while potentially doing certifications, proving your worth either through like your GitHub repo, or any other projects, blogs, and other things. I think that that's where the real value is today. There's a real challenge because cybersecurity is a big moneymaker. People tend to pitch it as this rags to riches kind of um, on ramp, and that's not always true. But because that narrative exists, you have a lot of these organizations that are providing, in my personal opinion, not the highest of quality of training to try to get these individuals funds and money, while promising the moon, and you get the clouds. That's not to take a dig at any of these 4-year degrees in cybersecurity. I haven't reviewed them all. I have talked to some individuals that are hiring managers, and it seems that it's not very consistent from organization to organization when it comes to these higher education organizations that provide these degrees, right? So some, they'll come out and they'll be like, the only thing they know is theory. They don't know how to use any of the tooling. Like, they don't have any of the applicable skills. And then you have other things, and I can only speak because I'm in Dallas, Texas. So Collin County Community College has an amazing program where they give you lots of hands-on training. You're working with Nmap, you're working with these tools, you're learning about networking and these other things. And that program seems to be really strong in producing individuals. So if you can find a program that, one, gets you certifications, but gets you lots of hands-on experience, and preferably some sort of internship so you can gain that, I think that that's a good program. But it doesn't have to be at a university, but you can also do it yourself. So that's kind of like how it would vary between like 15, 20 years ago and today. Is, I think today is definitely, it feels more of a trade than it does the traditional white-collar position that it was 20 years ago. Or 20 years ago, you were the guy that knew how to click the start button and fix the computer, and they said, "Congrats, you're no longer the janitor. You're promoted to IT because you were the only one in the office that knows how to work on a computer," which those days are long gone.
Yeah, kind of makes me think back to my AutoCAD days before I got into IT. Before I moved into my first sysadmin job, I worked for this company, and I'd figured out Windows 95 would come out, so I figured out how to get Novell NetWare
It's a
printing to
big
work.
day.
And so some of the people there in the office, we had a guy in house that was like an accountant. He was kind of the ad hoc IT guy because our main facility was in Stephenville, Texas, and so the IT staff was there because that's where most of the stuff was at. So this account was the one trying to fix things locally, and he couldn't figure out how to get printing to work, and I figured out how to get the printing to work. I was working on the computers and figuring all this stuff out, and the guy called me a hacker.
Congratulations, you get a promotion. My God, I remember those days, Phil. It was so. I was kind of in middle school at the time, and so I would help my dad out either on the weekends or during the summers to keep myself out of trouble. And I remember having to set up Novell NetWare. turning off NetBIOS, NetBEUI. You had to turn on IPX because this was back in the days before Active Directory existed, because that came out with Windows 2000. So the only directory system that you really had was either workgroups, which wasn't actually a directory system. It was just a way for computers to talk to each other, or Novell NetWare. If you don't know what that is and you're listening to this, Novell still exists. They're still in Utah. It's still used in some schools, which kind of terrifies me because it hasn't been updated in 20 years. But before IP took over, there was kind of a battle between IP and IPX and other things. There's just a lot of really interesting history behind it, because IPX was closed source, so you had to get licensing for it, which is why IP eventually won as the protocol. But yeah, NetBIOS, NetBEUI, all that. It was, oh my goodness, I'm having flashbacks now. So.
They used to have an interesting product. I think it was called Border Guard or Border Gateway or something, but it was interesting because you set up a server like in your DMZ, and it would communicate IPX, SPX internally, and then IP to the internet. So if you got access to that system, it's only talking IPX to the other servers. You're not going to be able to do anything. And so you'd have to be able to hack NetWare or whatever, but it does kind of provide some layer of security, but it was kind of an interesting product.
It almost sounds like a proxy in some capacity. Like, oh, well, this one's using this protocol, so this is going to broker this, which is kind of interesting. I didn't know about that. Like, I really only worked more on the internal side of things when I did that kind of work, because I did a bunch of grunt work. Like, I was the one that took the God, I can't even tell you how many of those it wasn't the 3/4 floppies, and it'd be like 50 of them, and I'd have to sit there and just slap them in one at a time as it's trying to update. And then it'd be like, oh, now you need to do your Windows updates 1 of 300, and then it'd crash half the way through. You'd have to start all over again, unless you had Ghost, because Norton used to be slightly decent for Ghost. But yeah, you'd use Ghost to image it or whatever. But
we used to always rib our desktop support guys, because they would just, if things weren't working, they would just throw a ghost image on it or whatever. And we used to call them certified ghost engineers.
Oh my God. Well, I mean, like, dude, at a certain point back then, like most people don't realize this. It was the Wild West. Like, there was stuff that hooked directly into the kernel, and if you tried to uninstall it, hosed the whole system. So Norton Antivirus was the worst stuff on the planet, because when you uninstalled it, it would hose your DLL files, and you basically had to reimage the OS every time. Like, but it was common because they didn't have the API frameworks that they have today, and you would have all of these, like, it was just, it was a bit of a rough time. It was a simpler time though.
Yep.
So, because people would have public IPs on their on their personal systems, and if you don't do that today. But
no, a lot of these universities were bad about that. Have like a whole certain class subnet, and every IP was a public addressable, publicly routable IP address.
Yeah. Yeah, it always reminds me of that, because when I was growing up, my dad was kind of a nerd, so we'd watch like war games, right? So back in the old days when they used to war dial back in the 80s, and it always made me laugh, because I was like, no, surely they wouldn't do that. And now that I'm like this age, I'm like, people still do that today. Like, Shodan is a thing. It's kind of nuts to think about that personally.
My first engagement as a consultant, as a pen tester, was a war dial. This is back in 2012. We had a bank that was one of our customers, and they had a war dial done every year.
Interesting. Is that because they had modems on their network gear?
Yes.
Yeah. I was like, that makes sense, because
a lot of things back in the days with the banks and stuff, they'd have modems attached to mainframes, other devices, so people with the company could support it, or the vendors for that product could dial in. And sometimes it wasn't always, if you had some of those systems where there's some kind of security when you're dialing in, but then there were some that weren't set up securely, that you just dial into it. There's nothing there, and anyone can dial right in. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, even in my current position, up till a few years ago, before we were able to deploy SD-WAN, among other things, we had backups in case, like, our remote sites would go down and they couldn't get into the network. So you'd be able to dial in, and I mean, like that technology still exists because even 7 years ago, before I got into cybersecurity on this side, I worked at NCR and I did restaurant support. And we had the oh god, what was the name of it? It was a 56K modem that was a failover in case the high speed internet would go down because otherwise they couldn't process credit cards. So it was like it was a last ditch attempt, but the problem was, you know, you still had a modem on site. They had to have separate lines for everything. Like it was, they're still around. Like people still
Hmm.
use faxes. Um, I mean, if you work in healthcare, I am sorry because you have stuff that runs as root that's 30 years old, just like IT OCS stuff. Like, yeah, there's a lot out there, and there's a lot of different facets. And we didn't even touch on the ICS OT stuff because, like,
Yeah.
if you work in a factory floor, um, you know, and I walk in, like, I'm not going to know anything. Like, if you learn those cybersecurity skills, that's way more transferable because you're like, yeah, I used to work a factory floor, and now I understand the security piece of it. Yeah, I know you can't put antivirus on that PLC because it's running Windows 95. Like, you're not going to do that. So we need like a ICS gateway or something to deal with all this. But that's not something I would understand. But because
Hmm.
someone from that background would, they would be more equipped to provide consulting and understanding of that, which gives even more credence to what we were talking to about before, which is coming from different facets of life is it's a strength.
Yeah. And that's one of the things even mentioned that too, if you work for a bank and, some financial institution, a lot of times I don't see it as much, but at one point, companies wanted you to have some experience in that industry. You may not exactly know their environment, but you know some of the terminology and some of the functions. So it's a little bit easier for you to come up to speed on their
Yeah,
systems.
yeah, and you're also even because one of my jobs was I was a teller at one point for a large bank, and but I understood when I interviewed for the position that I'm in with the credit union that I work for that we had to deal with Sarbanes-Oxley, we had to deal with GLBA, we have to deal with these other financial requirements. So credit unions are different. So banks, most people know the FDIC. Well, there's a credit union version called the NCUA, right? And they do oversight for those organizations. Having worked in that environment previously, it was considered a strength that I knew a lot of that because it wasn't something that they had to teach me because I had dealt with that before. Like I had dealt with what are called SARs and CTRs. Like I understood a lot of that. And so, yeah, like you said, right? If you come up through that industry and you bring these skills with you, a lot of times they're a lot more interested in you because they know that you understand how these organizations operate.
Yep. So we're getting down towards the end of the show. Is there anything you'd like to discuss
Oh,
that
really?
didn't
That
get
was
a
quick.
chance to?
um, you know, I was reading some of the other show notes and other things that I know a lot of people talk about community and other things, but um, I think finding your community is important. But I think that finding things outside of your industry is also very important. So I know that Hacks for Pancakes, but
Mhm.
PanCakesCon I think really drove that home for me because it's another way to connect with people. That finding things outside of your specific realm allows you to connect with other people, but it's also healthy. And I think that really leaning on communities to bring you up will help you in the long run because you create these connections, you meet these people, you make these friends, and you find out that they're multifaceted. You find out very interesting things about them. So, like, what is it? Like Justin Ellis, who you had previously, he's big into drag racing. Well, I
Mhm.
love cars. It's a way that I can connect with him and talk to him about these things or joke with him about it whenever I talk to him on Twitter. But also understanding that the communities are different depending on where they are. Um, Discord, Twitter, and all these other places, you can find all these people. And I would actually say, like, reach out to these people because they're like myself, we're human and we want to connect with people. As long as you're just nice and respectful, like most of the time, they're just like, hey, like, yeah, let's chat, like, whatever. Let's trade memes. I don't know what to tell you. So, I mean, that's how it is in our Discord. So,
Yep.
we
Yep.
just post memes and jokes all the time and have a great old time. Then you have, some people who are very interested in the weather, such as, Funky. And then you have
Yeah.
Papa, who then talks about how he's going to be in a submersible mowing his yard. So yeah, I would definitely say reach out to people, build a community if it's not there, join a community, but you don't have to reinvent the wheel on all of this, and you belong. And that would be the big piece to it.
Yeah, great advice. So thanks for taking time out of your schedule to join, and especially last minute, like you did. But it was a big help.
Yeah, no, absolutely. This has been a great time. I wish I had more time to plan. I might have had something more saying instead
Yeah.
of just rambling.
Oh,
So,
Matt, have you
I
come
kid,
back again?
but
Have to have you
yeah,
come back
no,
again sometime.
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, you were there for my other fireside chat, so you know how that goes. But
Yeah.
so, all right.
Yep.
Well, thanks, Phil.
You're welcome.